webinar series exploring the higher education policy landscape in the U.S. and in the U.K. My name is Krista Northup. I'm the Director of Education for North America at SONIM S4 and will serve as a moderator today. For those of you new to SONIM S4, we are a market entry and expansion specialist organization. We assist our university partners with entering or expanding internationalization efforts in 20 countries around the world. We actually have offices and are very active in the UK, and that's our interest and investment in today's topic. Today's webinar features two international education professionals who live and work in the UK. I'm going to provide a further introduction to them both in a minute, but first I'd like to provide a brief overview of what we're planning to cover in today's session. There has been huge political change in both the US and the UK in the past year. The changes brought about by Brexit and the Trump presidency have brought significant implications to the higher education policy landscape in both countries. In this webinar series, we are speaking with practitioners about what it all means in a way that is easily digestible and relevant to our daily work. Our speakers today, Miranda and Zoe, work with a wide range of institutions in the UK. Their comments and perspectives are reflective of the trends and takeaways across the sector. Just to reiterate, today's session is focused solely on the landscape in the UK, so it's going to be particularly relevant for U.S. universities working in the UK. For those of you interested in the U.S. higher education landscape, please remember to tune in next Thursday, November 16th at the same time, where we will be running the other side of this webinar focused on the U.S. Now let me introduce our speakers. First, we have Miranda Thomas. Miranda is Head of External Affairs at Universities UK International, part of Universities UK. As a member organization for the executive heads of the UK's universities, UK is the voice of the country's higher education sector. It offers advocacy and representation, research and analysis, information and advice, and member meetings and conferences. Universities UK International, or UUKI, aims to help universities flourish internationally through its unique ability to represent them and act in their collective interests. With a background in PR and communications, much of it spent in higher education, Miranda joined the UK team 2 weeks before the EU referendum. As such, she's been very busy ever since. Welcome, Miranda.
Thank you.
Next, please let me introduce Zoe Marlowe. Zoe is our Head of Client Relations at SONIM S4 based in the UK. Zoe has over 15 years of experience in the international education sector, including periods in the TEFL industry in the UK and abroad, in US study abroad and exchange, international student recruitment, pathways marketing, independent schools, and international education consultancy. She now looks after the UK university relationships for SONIM S4. Hi, welcome, Zoe.
Hi, thanks, Krista.
Okay, everyone, just in terms of a small technical detail, if you have a question, and we welcome as many questions as you have today, please find the chat box on the left-hand side of your screen. Type your message. They will come through to me, and I will be happy to ask our panelists at the end of the presentation. So let's kick this off. Miranda and Zoe, we are very excited to have you both contribute dynamic information for the group today. Let's start off with the political landscape. In a recent article, I read that the higher education sector in the UK is not universal enough to enjoy mass affection or loyalty like state schools or like the NHS, nor small or sufficiently autonomous enough to be left alone like independent schools. Zoe, could you comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So as the country moves towards achieving a 50% participation in higher ed, there is a growing perception at the same time that higher ed is actually responsible for, rather than the solution to, a variety of ills. And I think the narrative around Brexit and expertise and elitism is all part of that. I think that's leading to a sense, very broadly speaking, that universities are slightly out of step with the mood of the country. And I guess for me, the question is is where the universities have forgotten their roots. Have they forgotten their social mission as part of communities, wider communities, in the hunt for global rankings and, big capital development projects on campus? So universities are going through quite a difficult time, and I really felt that the slide that you can see here really kind of shows that the sector is under pressure from a variety of different actors and a variety of different directions. So, there's a lot coming at the sector. It is going through quite a politicized phase, I think, if I can put it that way.
Okay. And what would you say are the contrasting views of the two main political parties towards higher education in England and Wales? And Scotland has a different system, is that right?
Yes, that's right. So education is part of the devolved administration and government. So what we're talking about today is the education system in England and Wales. And Scotland is not only a separate system, but has a separate legislative approach. For example, no tuition fees. But I think the tuition fees and the funding piece is really important, because as students increasingly become consumers, as they start to equate fees to contact time and the amount of teaching, face-to-face teaching they're receiving, and starting to connect that to graduate employability, and the sense that if you graduate from a certain university, your starting salary will be X level, whereas if you graduate from a different university, it may be higher or lower. As that transparency feeds in through the system, what you find is that money really does begin to talk, and this is one of the big places where the politics world and the education sphere are really coming together. So our ruling Conservative Party made two big announcements about funding at their annual conference in September. The first one was that the current fees which we charge UK students will be frozen at £9,250. And that was a surprise, because there's been a general sense that fees are going to continue to move upwards. And so by freezing them for the moment, and even looking at potentially lowering them in the future, or even potentially doing away with them, that's going to have an impact on university budgets and planning. The second thing is that the amount of money a graduate needs to earn here before we start paying back those fees has also just increased from £21,000 to £25,000 a year. What that means is that, as I say, universities are going to come under budgetary pressure, but and how are they going to square the circle? Is it that they're going to look to increase international numbers further, or are they going to make cuts internally, or are they going to consolidate services? Is the administration of universities going to get a bit leaner? That may be one outcome. The opposing party is the Labour Party. Their leader, Jeremy Corbyn, has really galvanised the youth vote, part of the reason that he did so well in the election earlier this year. And the big sort of position from the Labour Party is that tuition fees should be abolished entirely, with the reintroduction of grants, so government money given to students. I have no idea how that would actually work in reality. I don't think it's a viable policy, but it has contributed to really moving the debate towards fees and funding, and there's no doubt that the Conservative announcement on fees was really influenced by that. So money talks in the UK increasingly, and that is the piece to take from what the parties are overall, their general sense is money.
Thanks for that, Zoe. And can you talk about the key actors shaping policy in this area?
Yeah, of course. So there are probably two key actors, not both of these two, I hasten to add. So our Foreign Secretary, who's with you in the US just at the moment there, Boris Johnson, on the left, but he has a younger brother, Joe Johnson, who is, among other things, the Universities Minister. And he is an interesting candidate. on the Conservative side. When I go to a conference, I often hear that he is very supportive of the sector, but actually, when you meet him and when you read what he's saying, he doesn't come across as very passionately defending some of the challenges that the sector are facing. So I find that quite interesting. Certainly, recent announcements that he's made have included, suggesting to universities that they should really start to look and defend executive pay, that they should start really maintaining or upholding free speech. So he is quite an unusual university secretary, I think, in that sense. The other person who's really important, but maybe less obvious as a politician defining the debate, is this lady here, Amber Rudd, who's the Home Secretary. So she has just commissioned a review on the costs and benefits of international students in the UK. But just yesterday, the Financial Times was reporting that she is leading a campaign inside Cabinet to take international student numbers out of net migration figures, which is a very hot topic of debate here in the UK and has been for probably a couple of years. What's interesting about both Jo Johnson and Amber Rudd is that both of them are being spoken of fairly regularly as potential future leaders of the Conservative Party. And so they do hold quite a lot of clout. And it will be interesting to see how they continue to engage in the debate, which is in the media and in the country at large going forward.
Okay, so speaking of the media, how are universities being covered in the media at this point?
Not well, I think, is the short answer. So over the summer here, there was a lot of media interest in a variety of issues, which are regularly covered, but which in the gap after the election and kind of over the summer when Parliament was in recess, really seemed to fill a hole in popular imagination. So there was a lot of coverage about Vice-Chancellor pay, for example. This is Vice-Chancellor Glynis Breakwell. She is the Vice-Chancellor at the University of Bath, and she's the highest paid Vice-Chancellor and has been singled out for particular attention in terms of her salary. And here is a piece from just earlier this week, which just says that the applications at her university are substantially down, and is there a link to all the negative press around her salary? The other thing that has been widely discussed over the summer was the fees piece, and the idea that by having every university in the UK pretty much set the same fee, institutions were acting as a cartel and in terms of establishing a monopoly. And actually Miranda's boss, the head of UK, was saying that the repeated claim about cartels, was potentially libelous, and it would be interesting to see where that was going. So I think all of this fits into a really kind of populist media-led kind of narrative, which really says, do you know what, picking up on the themes around the referendum to leave the UK, to leave the EU, really this sense of we've had enough of experts. And so in the popular press, it is true to say that universities are not very positively received at the moment.
Interesting. So the conclusion we can draw is that the UK higher education sector is going through a highly politicized and not particularly positive phase at the moment, driven by the media. Okay. Let's shift gears a little bit and look at the economics. Miranda, the funding landscape in the UK, surely universities bring economic benefits to the UK, which any government no doubt would appreciate. To what extent has this been measured?
Yeah, thanks for that. So as you would expect, universities bring a massive economic benefit to the UK. And here at Universities UK, we actually have an annual study that looks at this. So the latest figures we have, which look at the year 2014 to 2015, found that UK universities now generate a knock-on impact of nearly £95 billion for the UK economy. They also support around 1 million jobs throughout the UK, and that's equivalent to around 3% of all employment. So that's universities spending money on teaching and research, residence and catering, sports and other activities, as well as money that international students and their guests bring into the country.
Great, thank you. And a specific aspect of that, can you talk a little bit about spreading wealth away from London and the southeast?
Yeah, absolutely. So traditionally a lot of wealth in the UK, and also a lot of quite a lot of industry is based in London particularly, but also in the southeast. But actually, if you look at universities, they're employing large numbers of people across all of the UK's nations and regions. And in many places, they're actually either the largest or one of the largest employers in their local area. In terms of links with businesses and attracting students from overseas, they bring in significant investment from around the world. And also they support local businesses and create jobs, helping to regenerate quite a lot of, many deprived towns and cities. And of course, it's not just about financials. I mean, the universities also enrich communities by giving local people a chance to take part in arts and culture and music and sports activities on campuses.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So the conclusion sounds like that further pressure will be on universities' actual activities driven by political motivation. It's interesting. Thanks for that, Miranda. And just a reminder to everyone listening in, please go ahead and chat your questions into the chat box. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you have at the end. All right, so we're going to go ahead and advance to the next section, which is about the regulatory dimension. So Zoe, I was hoping that you could comment on who is looking after the sector on the government's behalf.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I said, Jo Johnson is a minister who has got a lot of power at his disposal, and that has just been reinforced by the recent passing of the Higher Education Regulatory Bill here in April of this year. The new regulator was decided to be a body called the Office for Students, and this is really a super regulator. It's not actually going to come into action until next spring, but the consultation about how it works is out at the moment. There are over 500 pages of consultation, which is being invited from affected stakeholder groups, whether that's students, whether that's institutions, anyone who's got a view on it. So extensive consultation. So although that super regulator comes into force from the 1st of January, it's unlikely that they're going to be able to do anything really effectively until at least April time. But when they do get into their stride, it's going to be an extremely powerful regulator. For example, the Office for Students will be able to award the university title to institutions who don't presently have it, and decide whether to give degree awarding powers, as well as granting funds strategically, taking into account government priorities. And that's going to account for about a third of all institutional funding grants currently distributed by HESCI. So it's really, really significant. They can control who calls themselves a university and where the money goes to a large extent. And on top of that, they also are going to have the ability to revoke degree awarding powers and university titles if a university should fall short of expectations. This is quite a big move, I think, because as well as giving the government a significant amount of power, it's also going to potentially reshape engagement with students, and hopefully student unions here in our UK universities will be able to engage with that. But in the meantime, it means that partners that US institutions might be working with are likely to be quite distracted by both the amount of political activity, the implication of a funding freeze, and now getting to grips with interacting and engaging with a new regulator. It's all quite serious stuff. And so, you know, for US universities who have partners here to really understand just how much there is going on in the landscape is really significant.
really important. Thank you. That's really helpful. And Miranda, maybe you can talk about how what Zoe has just talked about, how does that dovetail with assuring teacher quality?
Sure. So here in the UK, we've got a really rigorous quality assessment system. So there's a number of different things I want to mention. First of all, the QAA, which is our quality assurance agency, and that's independent not-for-profit organisation that's tasked by the UK government to safeguard standards and basically make sure that all institutions that are allowed to use the university title are giving a high level of student experience in teaching. We also have a number of tools to help students make the best choices when it comes to choosing what kind of university they want to go to. And actually those tools also encourage universities to make sure they're continually improving in what they do. So the first is the Destination of Leavers survey, which is colloquially known as the DELI. And that collects information on what all leavers from university programs are doing 6 months after they're qualifying from their course. So basically looking at have they gone into employment or further study, if so at what level, that kind of thing. There's also the National Student Survey, or NSS, and that's a big survey that asks all undergraduate students questions about various different aspects of their experience at university, and that combined data is then made public via the UNIVAC's website. So if you're a prospective student, you can go onto that website, look at the courses that you're interested in, and actually compare that data and see what kind of experience other students have had at those institutions. So the latest and the most controversial to add to this is the Teaching Excellence Framework, otherwise known as TEF. And this was introduced originally to kind of rebalance the importance of teaching and research at institutions. We've got the Research Excellence Framework, which is a bit of a bureaucratic beast that basically looks at research excellence within universities. And because of that, it has been suggested that universities were skewing their kind of priority very much towards research, and actually teaching was getting a little bit neglected. So the TEF is a government-run exercise to evaluate the quality of the undergraduate student experience. So each institution has 6 metrics in various different categories, and they're deemed to be performing well or less well against a benchmark of institutional peers, so other institutions that have a similar cohort of students to them. Based on that, they're then judged bronze, silver or gold, and the government's always been very clear that the bronze, silver and gold is sort of based on a level of quality that's already there, that's brought in by the QAA. But at the same time, there's been quite a lot of criticism that actually branding something bronze can make it look, internationally particularly, people don't really quite understand what that means, and they think actually that that's not as good as it should be. It's all been a little bit of a trial. So the first round of awards was announced in June, and the government's now working on the next year, and also potentially a subject level test, so looking at teaching in different subjects. And I guess there's a couple of sort of controversial things around it. The first of all, it doesn't actually really measure teaching, so it's a little bit badly named in terms of the metrics that are actually based on student satisfaction scores, on retention and on student employment, all of which could be better badged as student experience rather than teaching. There's also been some complaints, particularly by some of the sort of top research excellence institutions, that the fact that the institutions are benchmarked. So, for example, if you're a top institution that where all your students have, needed sort of AAAs to get in, then you'll be benchmarked against other institutions who have a sort of similar intake. So you might actually end up with only a bronze, whereas a college with maybe a much lower intake, or with an intake of students with sort of 2 Cs and a D, which will be benchmarked against other institutions with a similar intake, will be given a gold. That doesn't necessarily mean that the sort of top performing institution is worse than the gold, but if you're an international student who doesn't really understand the system, that's how you could take it. So it's all been a little bit controversial, but I think it's worth saying that actually we do have incredibly high levels of student satisfaction, both from UK students and international students. So something must be working.
I think it's probably just worth saying, just to add as well, that it's quite interesting because if US colleagues on the line were to look at their current UK partners, they would probably see the TEF badge quite prominently displayed on the website of their partner institution. And although it has been controversial, and although in some ways, as Miranda says, it is quite a blunt instrument because it is university-wide. You only get one rating, whatever the strengths of a certain department. it has led to some unexpected kind of anomalies within the system, and as Miranda says, those are a bit controversial and are probably being worked out. But it is an interesting first step in trying to measure and benchmark the teaching and student experience side on an official basis. And originally there was a thought that perhaps a gold ranking might be linked to higher fees. That's not going to happen. But for the test, I think, to continue to be valued, there is probably going to be a need to refine some of the methodology and potentially introduce those subject level badges as opposed to just one overall institutional umbrella badge.
Okay, good. One to keep our eye on, and I think that was really helpful. Thank you both. So let's shift gears a little bit again to international students. We've focused so far on the UK policy area, but surely the big topic of the day in the UK is Brexit. So Miranda, can you kick us off and talk about Brexit and the implications for students?
Yeah, very much so. So I think it's worth saying, first of all, that UK universities are among the country's most international institutions. And I don't think anyone is going to suggest that we're going to be turning our back on European colleagues and friends or stepping back from our partnerships in teaching, research and innovation. And I think we will remain international. However, as you would expect, there are some really big risks for universities in this area. So the first being around European students. So currently European students account for around 5% of the total number of students in the UK. So that's our biggest regional contributor. And actually some specialist institutions have around 20% of European students. And in Scotland, it's around 9.5%. So currently those students pay the same amount as home students, and they also have access to UK loans to cover the full cost of their studies. It's very unlikely that that will continue post-Brexit. So from a student recruitment perspective, there's a worry there. At the same time, 16% of our academic staff, around 31,000 people, are EU nationals, but this rises to above 25% in some institutions. So there are issues around staff mobility in terms of people who are already here being able to stay, being able to attract more people from Europe, and also just generally a lot of the conversation and a lot of the rhetoric around the referendum and also after that has been quite toxic. So I think there's a real sense that people who've lived here, maybe for 10, 15 years, are suddenly feeling like they're no longer welcome in somewhere that they felt was home, which I think is quite upsetting for a lot of us who work in the sector. The third issue is around research funding, which is another massive one for us. So in 2015-16, about 14% of all research grants and contract income came from EU sources. But for some institutions, that was over 50%. And now there's a question mark about whether we'll be able to continue our membership of European framework research funding programs, which are a massive source of research funding. And also there's a question mark about whether we'll be able to stay in Erasmus+, which is the student mobility European program. So students from the UK go and study for a year or semester in European countries, and we have students over here as well. So that's another thing where we sort of run a risk of no longer being part of.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I would say that although the referendum was well over a year ago now, actually the dynamics around the Brexit referendum really continue to define a lot of the political direction of the country, to the extent that cabinet members of the government, those most senior positions, are often described as Brexiteers or Remainers as a kind of de facto descriptor these days. And so in some ways in the sector we face a lot of challenges around Brexit, and we talk about it a lot. But really just to say to US colleagues, that's because it really is a topic that is alive and well and in active discussion day in, day out here. And the importance of it is almost hard to overestimate.
Yeah, and maybe you both can comment on the effect that it's having on the internationalization agenda of UK universities.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to some extent, I think the internationalization agenda kind of rolls on. I think this has actually made it even more important for universities. So just to give you a few facts about how international the UK's universities are. So 1 in every 6 students is from outside the UK. So that's over 436,000 students. More than 25% of our staff are from outside the UK. So that's 55,000 people from 180 countries. And more than half of our research outputs, the academic here will have an international co-author. And we've actually seen a growth of about 30% in articles co-authored with international researchers in the last 10 years. And nice to say, our most important single collaborative research partner is the US. At the same time, we have around 710,000 students registered on programs run by UK universities but outside the UK, so what we'd call transnational education. And there are only 15 countries in the world with no access to UK transnational education, and we've also seen a 13% growth of UK TNE in the last 2 years, which is really quite massive. At the same time, we've seen a bit of a shift in institutional priorities as well, so international partnerships, student staff mobility, and international student diversification has really been rising up executive university agendas. And actually, I might I've finished actually on one plug for a new campaign that here at Universities UK we've just launched, which is actually inspired by the IIE's Generation Study Abroad campaign. We've just launched Go International Stand Out, which is all about trying to get more British students to work, study or volunteer abroad as part of their studies. Because at the moment, a woeful 6.6% of UK students go internationally to study abroad. And we really want to, our aim is to double that by 2020 to 13%.
Great. And I think as well, just to finish on that point, I think what's the missing figure on the slide that Miranda is just talking us through there is how many of us in the sector have had that personal experience of study abroad and how determined we are that others should have that same experience. So I think for many of us, when we are kind of slightly under pressure from Brexit and from potential reduction in European opportunities, that only redoubles our commitments of head and heart to our internationalisation activities and partnerships. And, I'm really, really pleased that, all of this mobility and partnership activity is moving up the executive agenda within our institutions. We've definitely noticed it, as you know, here at Sanlam, and I think it's great to see that. And also to know that following the report that we commissioned with the American Council on Education earlier in this year, that there remains a strong commitment on both sides of the Atlantic to strengthen those partnerships and to really make those ever more meaningful. And in fact, Jo Johnson just a couple of months ago signed a new science and technology agreement to strengthen research collaboration between the US and the UK. So I think from the highest levels, there remains a real commitment to mobility and partnership and internationalisation from those of us in the sector, those of us supporting the sector, and also from government. So I think that is something positive to take away.
Thank you. Yes, that's really good, and it's very nice to end on such a positive note. That concludes the formal slides and the formal presentation. We are getting a number of questions in, Miranda and Zoe, so I will go ahead and start with some questions, and please both of you chime in as you see fit. So the first one is about Brexit. So in addition to Brexit, what other difficulties are universities facing?
Miranda, do you want to take that one?
Shall I pick that up? Yeah, that's a really good question. So I guess there's a number of different things. A few of the topics we've seen quite a lot over the last year, quite a lot of work around student mental health. There's actually been some really worrying statistics in the number of students who are struggling with their mental health on campuses, so that's a big thing. There's been a lot, as there is I think in many different industries, particularly at the moment, around any kind of sexual abuse or violence against women, etc. There's a lot around equality and diversity, and particularly widening participation. So trying to get students from different backgrounds, from different social groups into universities, and that's a big thing as well. So I think, I mean, there's there are many things I could talk about, but those are sort of a few that immediately spring to mind.
Great. Zoe, any further thoughts?
I mean, Miranda's outlined a whole load of challenges there, and it may be that some of them are resonant in the US space as well. When I think of, DACA and Dreamers, I feel like, gosh, there must be a whole mental health area, which is very much focused on that. But no, I mean, there's no question, I guess, that above and beyond those issues that Miranda just mentioned, I think as I said at the beginning, I honestly feel strongly that it's to universities to continue to prove their value, and that has to be about tying their activity really, really closely to the local community. Whether that's sharing research or facilities or access, whatever that looks like, I really feel that universities need to be firmly rooted in their community, because the moment that link gets lost or starts to float away, I think that is a contributing factor to things like the Brexit vote. Just resisting the over-marketisation of universities and really remembering their social mission at the core of things is probably what I would say would be the big one.
Okay. Great, thanks. Next question is about data protection. So this question asks, do you have any thoughts on new data protection policies coming out in May of 2018 for universities and how they manage and secure student data, applications, communications, etc.?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I can completely honestly, I can't talk very much from a university perspective, although we are as an organisation grappling with that ourselves, and I'm involved in that process, so I know it from what we're trying to do, and it is, I mean, quite, for anyone who knows anything about it, it's quite a sort of significant move in terms of consumer protection. So when you if you have somebody on a mailing list, not only have they had to have signed up to your mailing list at some point, you have to be able to say they signed up to this mailing list at this point and were happy to receive X, Y, and Z, and you can only then send them X, Y, and Z. So it's quite a big challenge, I think, for all sectors within the EU. I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, Zoe?
No, I think the question is referring to the GDPR, isn't it, the General Data Protection Regulation, and that comes into effect May next year. And I can tell you that I'm going on a seminar to learn more about it in a couple of weeks' time, after which SANAM as an organisation and probably other sector bodies will be producing a guidelines piece. So just watch this space, I think. I'm certainly aware of at least 3 institutions immediately on my radar who are grappling with this right now. So it is, the clock is ticking to get everybody up to speed and to get a thought-through response. So watch this space.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this one is about international fees. So regarding international student fees, do you believe there's going to be a continuing increase in these fees as opposed to the home fees being frozen, or a look at being reduced? I've just seen an MBA program set at £27,000 for a single year, a postgraduate degree, and was wondering if that sort of fee is reasonable, sustainable, and attractive to international students.
George, shall I take this one, Zoe, or would you like to? I'll take
you start.
Yeah. Sure, it's a really good question. So home fees are set by the government, so institutions can't change those. And obviously, as Zoe was saying, they've now been frozen for the foreseeable future. So in terms of, obviously, with inflation in real time, they are sort of, universities are getting slightly less money. In terms of international fees, they're set by universities, so it tends to be very much it depends very much on the kind of institution. So, for example, I used to work for a university where we did an MBA, which was £34,000 for a one-year course, and we recruited very well to it. So I think, I guess it's a lot to do with market forces and quality of education, and people will come, I think, if the education is of a high enough quality and they think they're going to get enough out of it. Do you have anything to add, Leo? I don't feel like that was a particularly interesting answer.
Yeah, I need to say that I think Miranda is right to highlight the link between quality and fees, because what you're really looking for is value, and I really question how much higher international fees could rise. I honestly don't think it's going to be that much higher, because although, as I said earlier, the system is becoming much more transparent around amount of contact hours and outputs and employability, the market will only bear so much. And I was at an amazing conference a couple of weeks ago where a speaker said, if you use a crystal ball, be prepared to eat round glass. But my own view is that they probably can't rise that much further, and that is probably at the moment the right thing.
Okay, thank you both. Another question here. Is there a sense for how the new regulatory framework will impact new foreign institutions seeking degree awarding powers?
New foreign institutions coming into the UK?
Correct.
I am going to say there's no sense in anything I've read so far which would relate to that. And I would say that is probably not top of anybody's mind at the moment, because there are 500 pages of consultation just about the bare operating standards of this organisation. So I think the Office of Students will no doubt have a view, but I very much doubt anyone's articulated it as yet, unless I've missed it in policy notes, in which case, Miranda, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I guess one thing to be aware of is that, as Zoe's already said, the UK HE sector is, well, the current government has really pushed the Conservative government has really pushed the HE sector towards being much more marketised, and the way it's done that is partly through making universities bring out a lot more data, but the idea being that obviously if consumers, it's much more about consumers knowing what they're getting, being able to see where they're likely to get off their degree, etc. As part of that marketisation, there is also a drive to open the markets up to other alternative providers, which has always been something that has happened, but it used to be very, very difficult for universities to get taught degree awarding powers. And there has been a sense through this process that the government does want to open the sector up to private providers, whereas traditionally universities have been public, not-for-profit institutions. So we have seen some, I suppose, foreign investment into UK institutions, and there are also some, for example, US colleges or institutions that have some sort of transnational education office, quite often business schools, quite often a sort of a year or something based here in the UK. We've also seen things like Hult Business School, who have invested and bought Astridge, so that is another way of international players, I guess, getting a piece in the UK market. So there's a sort of broad, opening up to other providers, but I don't think it necessarily goes that much beyond that at this point.
Okay. However, we'd be happy to take that conversation offline with whoever asked it and look into it in a bit more detail and see if there is anything currently in the paperwork that we haven't picked up which refers to this. So whoever asked that question, we will follow up with you in due course.
Perfect. That's great. And speaking of, if there are any other follow-up questions that people haven't had the chance to ask today, please do get in touch with any of the speakers here, and we'd be happy to take those offline. I want to thank everyone so much for joining today. I'm going to give one last plug to the U.S. higher education webinar that we'll be doing next Thursday at the same time. Next Thursday, November 16th, where myself and Robin Helms will attempt to unpack the U.S. situation. Robin is from the American Council on Education, and we're very pleased to have her as a speaker, as we were to have Miranda from the UKI join us today. So thank you again to Miranda and to Zoe.
Thanks very much. It's been good fun.
And this webinar, the recording, will be available soon and will be sent out to all participants who have registered. Thank you all, and we'll look forward to seeing you again on another webinar. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.